Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this crucial discussion on advancing global efforts against human trafficking at the United Nations NGO Commission on the Status of Women. This session is proudly sponsored by UPNEA and is in collaboration with the New York University School for Professional Studies. It brings together research, innovation, and global partnerships to address one of the most challenging issues of our times, that is human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking. It has become the second largest organized crime in the world, generating billions of dollars in illicit profits while consuming and exploiting over 20 million people, most of whom are women and children. As we mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, where we first declared that women's rights are human rights, we must remember and recognize that to truly achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 5.2, ending violence against women and girls, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, we must confront this crisis with urgency, innovation, and collective action. Also, we need to bring in the next generation who are the most likely targets of human traffickers who prey upon the young and the vulnerable to combat this crime. Today, we are honored to present the year-long research conducted by NYU students from Professor Sylvia Meyer's class. Jennifer Park, Nidhi Jariwala, Celine Saad, Kavya Thakkar, Maria Barbu. Their research explores the role of artificial intelligence, financial tracking, and corporate social responsibility in combating human trafficking, sex trafficking, offering new solutions to disrupt trafficking networks, trace illicit financial flows, and hold corporations accountable. Their work would not have been possible without the mentorship and guidance of Professor Sylvia Meyer, whose expertise in women's rights, international relations, gender studies has provided critical global insights in this fight and to the students as they figured out all the challenges of this huge problem. At UPNEA, we believe that ending sex trafficking cannot happen without the next generation leading the change. That is why we have partnered with NYU to develop courses, oversee practicums, and mentor students, ensuring that young minds are equipped with the knowledge and tools to take on the global fight. I now hand it over to Professor Sylvia Meyer, who will moderate today's session, and a special thank you in advance to Hudson Ort from UPNEA, who will close our discussion with final thank yous and remarks. Thank you for being here and for your commitment to ending human trafficking through innovation and collaboration. Over to Sylvia.
Thank you so very much, Ruchira, and thank you to Hudson for sharing Ruchira's welcome video. I am very, very honored and delighted to be representing Ruchira as well as the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs. My name is Dr. Sylvia Meyer. I am the academic director of our program in Global Affairs. I have also had the honor and pleasure of working with a wonderful group of students over the last year on this consulting practicum. I will share a little bit more about this in a moment. And with Ruchira for many years. Ruchira is a wonderful friend and mentor. She's an absolute rock star. She used to be on the faculty here at the Center for Global Affairs, where she taught a course on human trafficking, led a study abroad to human trafficking, and really got us all in the CGA community fired up about combating and the needs to combat this grievous crime. As Ruchira said, human trafficking is a global catastrophe, and this is really no exaggeration. About 50 million people are held in slavery at any given time around the world every year. 54% of those are women and children, and within that, with that number, 12 million are children. sex and human trafficking are the second most profitable illicit business in the world, second only to the sale of drugs. Numbers vary, but we're looking at roughly 170 billion, this is not million, this is $1 billion of profits, annual profits in the forced commercial sexual exploitation of women and children, as well as some men. So as you can see, and as Ruchira shared with all of us in her very kind introductory remarks, it is of the utmost urgency to join forces in combating this grievous crime. To look at how we can innovate our methods that are tried and true, but innovation is always a good idea, to combat human trafficking, and how we can work together, advocacy groups, academia, government organization, as well as the private sector, in combating this crime and to reducing the numbers who are trapped in what is essentially human slavery. So once again, a very warm welcome, and thank you for joining today's conversation, which is called Advancing Global Efforts Against Human Trafficking, Innovations and Partnerships. A little bit of background on today's panel and panel conversation, as well as presentations. Our collaboration, meaning the collaboration between UpNeUp, of which Ruchira, of course, is the founder and executive director and absolutely brilliant leader, as well as the Center for Global Affairs here at NYU SBS, originated about half a year ago, when Ruchira and I decided to catch up over lunch and talked about how we can work together in combating human trafficking. What can we in academia do to support the tremendous and terrific work of UpNeUp here in the United States, as well as abroad? And we started tossing around ideas, and then we ended up deciding on pursuing together what is called here in the Center for Global Affairs a consulting practicum. A consulting practicum is a graduate course in our program, in which between 4 and 8 students, by application only, are working with quote unquote a client. This is the name and the term that we are using. That can be an NGO such as UpNeUp, that can be a UN agency, that can be a business in the private sector, that can be a government organization, on a particular project that helps and supports our partner in their work. And in the context, or in the case of UpNeUp, Ruchira proposed 3 white papers. These white papers, and she mentioned those in her short video, related to money laundering and human trafficking, the relationship between financial crimes and money laundering and human trafficking, best and worst practices in the private sector to combat human trafficking, and very importantly, especially nowadays, AI and human trafficking. And over the last roughly 6 months, our intrepid team of 5 students, graduate students from our program, who will share with you their work in just a few minutes, have done a deep dive through interviews, through desk research, through document analysis, through many forms of research to unearth data on these 3 quote unquote research questions that Ruchira tasked us answering and writing white papers on. The result of their absolutely fabulous work was really impressive. They left no stone unturned. They tried to chase down every person possible who could share more about the work on money laundering and human trafficking, or working in the space of money laundering and human trafficking in the private sector, especially in the transportation and hospitality industry, as well as in the space of AI. And the material that this team of 5 students found is material that we hope will support the advocacy efforts of UpNeUp here in the United States, as well as around the world. And I would now like to turn it over. We've talked a lot about the project. I would now like to turn it over to our presenters. We have 3 presentations prepared for you, 15 minutes each. Each presentation will speak to we'll speak to one of the white papers, Money Laundering by Maria, the Private Sector by Nidhi, Celine, and Kavya, and last but not least, AI and Human Trafficking will be presented by Jennifer. We are collecting questions on these presentations that you may have in the chat. We will address them after the last presentation by Jennifer, just in the interest of time, and then we will have more of an interactive Q&A depending on how many questions are coming in. So please drop your questions in the chat. I'm very excited about these 3 presentations, and I really hope you will enjoy them as much as Hudson and Ruchira and I have, and you will have lots of questions that will make for a very engaging presentation. And without much further ado, I would like to turn it over now to Maria, who will be sharing her tremendous work, her terrific work on money laundering and human trafficking. Maria, you have the stage.
Thank you, Sylvia. And hi, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm going to share my screen. All right. And let me know if you can see it. But I'm going to start presenting now. So I will talk about how money laundering, cybercrime, and sex trafficking are interconnected, and what are the technological tools, legal reforms, and policy changes that banks can adopt to better detect and prevent money laundering related to cybercrime and sex trafficking. So a few key takeaways. So traffickers rely on sophisticated money laundering techniques to disguise proceeds from sex trafficking. The rise of digital platforms has enabled traffickers to recruit victims, advertise illicit services, and move money more discreetly. Banks are uniquely positioned to combat trafficking, and collaboration typologies and technology are key to bank success to combat trafficking. So the first chapter that I'll be presenting is the relationship between money laundering, cybercrime, and sex trafficking. And I have 2 sub-chapters, money laundering and sex trafficking, and cybercrime and sex trafficking. So for the first one, I know that the majority of our audience today is already familiarized with money laundering, but I still included a visual for those of you who are not. Now, data shows that between 2% and 5% of global GDP, which equals to roughly $800 billion to $2 trillion US dollars, is laundered annually worldwide. And the overlap between money laundering and sex trafficking is evident, with some countries experiencing high levels of both. And I have 2 maps to illustrate that. So the first map is the global money laundering risks in 2023. And this provides a score on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the highest risk for money laundering. So Haiti ranks the highest globally, followed by Chad, Myanmar, and the DRC. And other countries that have a high risk are China, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Pakistan. Now, the second map shows the global it's the prevalence of human trafficking globally in 2024. And we see with yellow, which indicates severe human trafficking risk, we have Haiti, China, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. And with dark blue, which indicates high risk, we have Chad, Myanmar, and the DRC. So these countries experience not only high levels of money laundering, but also high levels of human trafficking. So this really shows that money laundering and human trafficking reinforce one another. And the way they do is laundering provides traffickers with means to disguise and move illicit profits, while human trafficking generates illegal revenue that needs laundering. Now moving on to the second subchapter, cybercrime and sex trafficking. So this is also informally referred to as cyber trafficking. And in the context of sex trafficking, it is used to recruit, exploit, and profit from victims. The anonymity of the internet and the growth of online platforms have made it easier than ever for traffickers to evade law enforcement and operate on a global scale. And we have 3 categories of cyber-enabled trafficking: the identification and recruiting of victims, advertising, and cyber sex exploitation. And we're going to talk about all of them. So first, This takes place on social media, on dating apps, but also through job listings, and traffickers generally pretend to be modeling agents or offer fake employment opportunities, among other things. And here we have an example of a recruiting ad, and there are a couple of details that are important to mention. So these kind of ads include details that make it appear legitimate. So first we have promises of high earnings, such as daily cash payouts, 500 to 1200 daily. We have assurance of safety and professionalism, like safe professional clients, and we screen all. So these kind of details build trust and mask the exploitative nature of the work. But then we also have manipulative tactics. We have physical attributes like attractive females, 27 to 45 years old, sexy. And then we have some demanding attributes like must be reliable and trustworthy, must have a reliable car, must not be overweight, must always remember that client satisfaction is number one. So these physical and personal expectations, plus the vague language, because we're not really sure what this ad is for, these are common red flags of trafficking ads because they place emphasis on appearance and personal suitability rather than actual qualifications. And then moving on to the second category. So after recruiting the victims, traffickers exploit them online by posting ads on websites. And some of these ads may appear to be typical, but are coded in ways that communicate specific details to potential buyers while bypassing detection from automated filters or moderators. And here we have an example of a sex ad from Backpage. So for those of you who don't know, Backpage was a classified advertising website, and it got shut down in 2018 because it turned out it was involved in sex trafficking and money laundering. And here we have some interesting keywords and emojis like sweet and petite, available now, 23, and the emojis. And this puts forward for consideration my next slide, which is the use of emojis in online human sex trafficking ads from 2018. So basically, the purpose of this study was to improve the detection of online sex trafficking ads, and it used artificial intelligence and processed vast amounts of online ads and extracted meaningful patterns from both text and emoticons. And these are their findings. So table 1 talks about indicators like the age of victims. Then we have ethnicity and race. We have country of origin and nationality. Then table 2 shows the distribution of online ads that include specific emojis related to the sale of sex services. And then the third table, which is perhaps the most disturbing one, illustrates how specific emojis serve as indicators for minor victims of trafficking. So we have the growing heart, the cherry, and the cherry blossom. And then the last category, which is cyber sex exploitation. So this basically is the use of internet-based technologies such as webcams and live streaming platforms to sexually exploit individuals online. And examples include pornography or customized content for paying audiences. These acts are live streamed, they're recorded with footage either sold to paying clients or distributed on illicit websites. And the distribution channels vary from encrypted apps to private live streaming services to adult content websites, and they can be accessed or purchased by a global audience. And here we have a representative map for the prevalence of cyber sex trafficking. And the reason I included this map is because it's not accurate and it's really hard to find an accurate map. And the reason that is because the nature of cyber sex is hidden. So it's very hard for authorities to identify it and track it and detect it. So this makes it less likely to be accurately reflected in statistics. So we need to pay more attention to cyber sex. And of course, I also need to talk about the dark web and pay sites. So traffickers use the dark web to communicate with clients and distribute illicit materials. Pay sites are online platforms that allow users to anonymously upload and share content in the form of text. So in the context that we're talking about, these sites are used to share illicit material, including links to exploitative content or even victims' details for trafficking purposes. And here we have a research from 2018 that analyzed a darknet pay site where users can anonymously post messages, offers, and requests. And I'm actually going to talk about the findings while I show you a visual. So what they found out is that 36% of posts refer to child sexual exploitation, 44% refer to the sale or rent of children, and some titles appear multiple times, like girls for rent and sale and child escorts. And here we have some facts. So in 2022, over $1.5 billion in transactions happened on the dark web in the world. Approximately 70% of activities on the dark web involve illegal transactions and trade, and the primary medium of exchange are virtual currencies. Now I'm going to move on to the second chapter, which is challenges faced by banks in combating financial crimes related to trafficking. So they encounter a lot of challenges, but to summarize them, they mainly have a difficulty of tracing cross-border illicit financial flows, the increasing use of digital currencies, difficulty identifying the concealed financial behaviors associated with human trafficking, and banks are not adequately equipped or trained to identify trafficking-related financial patterns. And these last 2 points are particularly prevalent in regions with weak financial oversight or inconsistent enforcement, so generally developing or underdeveloped countries. And when it comes to anti-money laundering frameworks, so the progress has been significant. And according to the FATF, which is an international organization that sets the standards when it comes to AML and make sure that countries follow it. So according to them, in 2022, 76% of countries have achieved satisfactory implementation of the FATF's 40 recommendations, compared to just 36% in 2012. However, enforcement is inconsistent. And here I have a map of global anti-money laundering regulators. Now, this is a map that I had to make myself because it was really hard not to find the map that was Western-centric. And unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about each continent in detail, but I will say that the main key takeaway is that enforcement is inconsistent because of the complexity of money laundering methods, because we're talking about inadequate resources, and because of variations in regulatory interpretations across jurisdictions. Moving on to the third chapter, banks' best practices around the world. So first, we have enhanced transaction monitoring systems, so using advanced algorithms and AI tools to identify suspicious transactions that align with trafficking patterns. And as an example, we have HSBC that implemented AI-driven monitoring systems. And this is really good because it's capable of analyzing billions of transactions in just a few days. Another thing is customer due diligence and know your customer. So this is like understanding clients' activities and spot red flags indicative of illicit behavior. And Deutsche Bank integrated this, specifically customer due diligence. And this pretty much allows for more in-depth investigation, scrutinizing the legitimacy of businesses, the sources of funds, but also the involvement of any intermediaries. Then my personal favorite is public-private partnerships. So this is collaboration between banks and institutions to share intelligence and develop targeted interventions. The Mekong Club is actually one of the companies that I interviewed for this project. And they collaborated with HSBC, and they hosted sessions where they engaged employees from both the Mekong Club and HSBC. And they talked about human trafficking and risk assessment, and pretty much people from the Mekong Club educated people from HSBC. Then we have employee training and awareness. So training programs by banks for their employees to teach them how to recognize trafficking-related financial activities. An example is by the American Bankers Association. So they implemented a course that is free for their employees and also mandatory. And lastly, we have partnering with international financial institutions. So for example, we have JP Morgan's that participates in the Wilsburn Group. And what this group does is it establishes best practices, it promotes regulatory alignment, and also ensures that banks have the tools necessary to combat financial crime, including human trafficking, which is really important. So now, based on those practices, we're going to have now recommendations for financial institutions. So first, strengthening AML practices. It goes without saying, so ensuring compliance with global AML frameworks and standards, updating AML frameworks to address cyber-enabled financial crimes, and most importantly, establish typologies. This is something that all of the people that I interviewed talked about. And typologies are basically methods that criminals use to hide the origin of illegally obtained money. And these typologies need to be set up by the government. then banks can work to establish red flag indicators that set the standard for what is and isn't acceptable in transactions. So it needs to start with the government. Then we have technological tools, so investing in advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning for identifying suspicious transactions, and even using blockchain analytics to trace illicit financial flows. Now, I will say when it comes to artificial intelligence, we still have a lot of limitations because you do need to feed artificial intelligence with information. And as of right now, it's unclear what that information should look like, but it is very promising. Then we have legal and policy changes. So, advocating for laws that enhance detection and prevention of money laundering linked to trafficking and cybercrime, and promoting stronger penalties for financial institutions that are involved in enabling trafficking or just ignore the signs that trafficking is happening. Then we have interagency collaboration and information sharing. So, banks partnering with law enforcement, NGOs, and other financial institutions to identify trafficking networks. And this really allows for cross border collaboration to align regulations and share intelligence globally. Then, of course, it goes without saying ethical practices. So, zero tolerance policies for financial involvement in sex trafficking, building awareness and training. So, training employees to identify and report trafficking related activities, because, of course, that's not their main job. So, they don't know what to look for. So, they need to be educated about that. And implementing awareness campaigns within the institutions. And also just encouraging them to point out if something is wrong and having some sort of policies that protect them against potential setbacks. And then, lastly, we have transparency and accountability. So, publishing regular reports on anti money laundering and anti trafficking efforts. And I think this is really good for banks because it allows them to track their effort and see what are the gaps that still need to be filled. And this is my presentation. And I will be happy to answer some questions after our last presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Maria. That was absolutely fantastic research. You can tell from what was happening in the chat that there is great interest in your work. People want to get your PowerPoint, so I promised, we would share them. Team, all those of us who are joining us for the conversation, in the interest of time, we will be taking questions and collecting questions in the chat, and then we'll be answering the questions after all presenters had a chance to share their work, just again in the interest of time. So please hold your thoughts, Ryan, and Olivia, I think as well, Joyce as well. So thank you so much. Teresa, thank you for your interest. And now, without much further ado, I would like to turn it over to the amazing team to Nidhi, Kavya, and Celine, who will be sharing with us a snapshot of their brilliant white paper on private sector best and worst practices in combating human trafficking. Team, over to you. You have the stage.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Can you see it? Oh gosh. All right, thank you, everyone. So our presentation is on the role of the private sector and private sector companies in combating human trafficking. So we reached out to multiple contacts throughout the semester in these private sector companies specifically. However, none of them actually agreed to meet with us, but we will continue to refer to them throughout this presentation.
And we were also able to interview professionals from these organizations, which you see right here. So we interviewed Kevin Hyland and Duncan Jepson. Kevin Hyland is the UK's first anti-slavery commissioner and former chair of Institute for Human Rights and Business at NYU. And Christopher Gaffney is a professor in the Tisch Center for Hospitality at NYU and who specializes in global tourism risk, regenerative tourism design as well. We also interviewed a representative from PACT, which is Protect All Children from Trafficking, a member of ECPAT International and Child Prostitution and Trafficking. We interviewed Dylan Wecht, the public sector engagement specialist at Truckers Against Trafficking, which works with the transportation industry through training, partnerships, and advocacy efforts to raise awareness for and take action against trafficking. We interviewed a representative from UNODC, and then we also interviewed professors at the NYU Center for Global Affairs, which is our school, Professor Chloe Domrovsky, who's an expert in risk resilience. And then we also interviewed Deborah Hamlin, who's the Director of Operations at Bridgestone Commercial Tire Dealer Network, and Tina Arundel, who is the Senior Director of Communications at Travel Centers America. Thank you.
Celine, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. So we're going to start by giving some background about the topic. And we focused on the hospitality industry, the airline and transportation industry, international athletic events, the technology industry, and then we will provide some recommendations for that.
So first, a bit of background on human trafficking. Human trafficking is a modern form of slavery and generates about $150 billion annually in illicit profits. And it's driven by forced labor, sexual exploitation, and other exploitative practices. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline reported that in 2021 alone, there were over 10,000 reported cases involving 16,000 victims, solely in the US. So the private sector is complicit both directly and indirectly. Directly, it is through abuse of power in the company, whether it's the CEO or the frontline staff workers. And this can include workers taking bribes from the traffickers to look the other way, or them being the trafficker themselves and engaging in the trafficking themselves. But through indirect involvement, this looks like lack of training on identifying and reporting trafficking cases. So for hotels, this can look like hotels employing exploited migrant workers or sex trafficking victims forced to meet clients at hotels. For airports, this looks like traffickers and their victims crossing international borders, border points that are typically in airports. And in technology companies, it looks like online trafficking recruitment and remote exploitation. And then there are also increased cases of exploitation through tourism in international athletic events like the Olympics and FIFA. So the vulnerabilities of migrant workers are typically concentrated in the hospitality and tourism sectors. And migrant workers must have employment visas. However, obtaining them is very difficult, resulting in them borrowing money from traffickers with high interest rates, resulting in debt bondage to the traffickers.
And now to provide you some legal background that we used within our studies. So we used the United Nations Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, which supplements the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. We also used ILO conventions such as ILO Convention number 29 on forced labor and ILO Convention number 189 on domestic workers, which provide international standards to protect workers from exploitive practices. The Council of Europe's Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, which underscores the importance of public-private sector collaboration. And finally, on a domestic level, the U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which was passed in 2000, a cornerstone of the United States government's efforts to combat human trafficking and provide assistance to victims.
So a bit of background on the hospitality industry. In the US alone, the National Human Trafficking Hotline reported that 75% of survivors came into contact with hotels when they were exploited. And hotels and motels are very popular locations for trafficking recruitment because vulnerable individuals experiencing unstable housing turn to these locations and they often lack the support system. And due to lack of action and assistance from hospitality staff, these people are further exploited and these cases are never reported. So, because of there's insufficient anti-trafficking training for frontline staff workers. In fact, a survivor in Columbus, Ohio, was exploited at a hotel and stated the hotel staff disregarded the clear signs of trafficking, including the trash cans that were filled with condoms, cash-only payments for the rooms that were booked, and the refusal for housekeeping services. There's also a lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in anti-trafficking methods for companies. And the hypersexualization of Black and Brown women makes trafficking effects worse for these survivors. And it's also the reason why women of color are more likely to be exploited than white women. So, some companies have released anti-trafficking statements and have partnered with campaigns like It's a Penalty. And It's a Penalty conducts public awareness campaigns, and they have reached millions of people globally. But oftentimes, companies only condemn trafficking through these organizations without taking sustainable action.
So, as we said earlier, we reached out to a lot of airlines. Most of them did not respond. The ones that did respond declined our interview invitation, which shows a lot. But although they refrained from commenting, we do have evidence that there's a network of airlines, airports, and organizations that actively combat human trafficking and collaborate. Um, there is a lot of programs that are being developed. One of them is the Department of Homeland Security's Blue Campaign, which provides personnel training, aviation personnel training, from ticket agents to flight attendants and so on. And this Blue Campaign also collaborates with a lot of aviation partners, a lot of such as Alaska Airlines, Delta, JetBlue, and so on. And also the airlines do develop corporate responsibility reports, and they do emphasize to the public the work they do to combat human trafficking, the training they do, and all of that. Everything is online. Um, but there is a problem of transparency, and the fact that they did not answer to our engagement shows that. Although we do have little information about their role in addressing human trafficking, but we know what the challenges they have in handling human trafficking situations. Uh, and one of them is the fact that passengers were mistakenly reported as potential traffickers during flights. And one incident occurred with American Airlines where a singer was flying with his biracial children, and was accused of trafficking them, but falsely accused. And this really shows that airlines sometimes rely on superficial indicators such as race and undermines people's dignity. So they do have to pay attention to that. And there are other airlines who are involved in human trafficking situations, and one case is a charter flight, which is operated by the Romanian company Legend Airlines. In 2023, the plane was carrying around 300 Indian citizens, and they were reportedly trafficked.
I was particularly responsible for looking into the transportation industry. So, within the transportation industry, the United States Department of Transportation mandates human trafficking awareness for transportation employees to recognize and respond to potential trafficking situations. The Federal Transit Administration has also launched initiatives to integrate human trafficking awareness into public transit operations, ensuring that frontline workers are equipped with necessary knowledge. In terms of industry collaboration, Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking facilitates information sharing among government agencies and transportation companies. The U.S. Department of Transportation, as I mentioned, and the American Public Transportation Association work together to promote best practices and training programs within this transit industry. And then in terms of non-governmental efforts, which is among the orgs that we interviewed, the Truckers Against Trafficking provides specialized training for truck drivers, empowering them to identify and report any suspected human trafficking cases. This program has directly contributed to multiple victim rescues and increased law enforcement interventions. And then finally, technological innovations, which we'll talk about soon. Emerging technologies are also being explored to enhance detection efforts, and this includes audio analytics for autonomous vehicles, which could help recognize distress signals and alert authorities. And then to move on to international athletic events. So on the side, you'll see a picture of a campaign that was created during the Paris 2024 Olympics called It's a Penalty, which reached about 180 million people and had the attention to protect about 17,000, more than 17,000 survivors. But the campaign did reveal that gaps in anti-trafficking programs and limited broader partnerships are still remaining. The FIFA World Cup also did a campaign which focused on ethical recruitment and collaboration with governments and private sectors. And then finally, the Super Bowl in Las Vegas in 2024 also did an anti-trafficking campaign.
So moving on to the technology industry, the expansion of trafficking has expanded as technology has advanced, and victims and their personal information are found through social media and online dating platforms, making them vulnerable to further exploitation. In 2015 to 2017, the National Human Trafficking Hotline reported 845 potential victims recruited to online platforms. Therefore, content, and it was through Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, social media companies, and dating apps like Tinder, Grindr, Craigslist. So, therefore, content moderation is crucial to limit this exploitative content and identify potential cases. So TikTok actually does have content moderation, and it uses AI and human moderators to detect exploitative content. But the first round of content moderation only uses artificial intelligence to detect content, and the second round does use human moderators, but only if the content has generated a certain amount of views. So many types of inappropriate content still make it onto the platform without proper moderation. And this is concerning because many TikTok users are. Furthermore, OnlyFans is an online platform, and the company states it powers creators to profit off of their sexually explicit content safely, but many have still been exploited on this platform. And the rules require creators to have written consent from everyone included in the content. But up until November 2022, these creators were not required to show proof of the consent before posting. So now OnlyFans does check for the proof of consent, but this major lapse in preventing sexually explicit content and these exploitative acts have had created real damage for these people. So moving on to our recommendations, first we'll look at the hospitality industry. The first recommendation is companies must adopt a zero tolerance policy for trafficking and commit to monitoring worker treatment across supply chains. And the second is staff accountability, implementing policies to prohibit staff involvement in trafficking cases, but also ensuring they are not liable for wrongful reports unless it's based on discrimination. As Celine talked about, there were a lot of wrongful cases of trafficking reports with parents and children of different races. So that should not be happening. Public awareness is really important. So, using public service announcements and in hotel flyers to educate guests on identifying and reporting trafficking, and then also offering specialized training for staff on dealing with traumatized victims because they may be a little defensive and asking about potential trafficking cases, and transparency and data collection because prioritizes prioritizing this within the business to understand the trafficking risk can also enhance preventative strategies. And furthermore, we need to establish clear anti-trafficking expectations for these companies. So the companies need to conduct background checks to prevent indirectly supporting traffickers. training programs, so mandating staff training on anti-trafficking methods, including identification and reporting protocols, and focusing on high-risk areas like hotels, cruise lines, major athletic events like the Olympics and FIFA to ensure accountability and vigilance. And then, of course, DEI training to avoid identifying wrongful cases based on racial discrimination. Collaboration, so partnerships with local anti-trafficking NGOs and nonprofits to support survivors and prevent exploitation, and also offer resources like alternative housing and job opportunities to prevent further re-victimization. Support for migrant workers to reduce traffickers' control. So this can include setting up bank accounts for workers because many traffickers financially exploit them, and then improving monitoring systems to identify trafficking cases. And finally, child exploitation prevention can be achieved by following ECPAT guidelines to prevent child sexual exploitation.
So key recommendations for the airline industry include balancing responsibilities and practicalities, meaning to clarify and communicate the limited role and expectations placed on airline staff, what they can and what they cannot do. Provide also clear protections for whistleblowers against potential legal or any personal safety risks. Also improve training and action-oriented awareness. So by that, I mean implement effective and tangible indicators, but also a practical anti-trafficking training, and also create universal standards for anti-trafficking training and practices. Another recommendation would be to address industry vulnerabilities, meaning strengthen screening, border control processes, enhance oversight and accountability mechanisms to mitigate risks of insider complicity, also prioritize the regulation of private jets and chartered flights. Furthermore, we should leverage technology, maybe invest in advanced detection technologies such as AI and facial recognition, but also establish robust communication channels between air crews and ground personnel for better collaboration. And finally, enhance international cooperation, meaning develop stronger data sharing protocols between airlines, airports, and law enforcement agencies between countries. Also advocate for the establishment of uniform legal framework, such as some extradition agreements, and enhance maybe the Interpol and Europol's role in supporting transnational anti-trafficking efforts.
And for the transportation industry, I came up with about 4 or 5 recommendations, which might be helpful to implement. So, implementing training programs for all frontline employees, which include drivers, ticket agents, and security personnel, ensuring that monitoring systems such as CCTV and standardized protocols are in place for reporting trafficking, technological integration, AI, predictive analytics, and blockchain, which can track travel behaviors and ensure passenger transparency. Collaborative efforts, with task forces, intelligence sharing, and awareness campaigns all working together to combat this. And community support programs. Transportation companies should fund and support community support programs in trafficking-prone regions, which aligns with efforts for CSR strategies. And then finally, about 6 recommendations for international athletic events. Conducting risk assessments to identify vulnerabilities and challenges, strengthening labor protections to ensure protections for migrant and temporary workers in high-risk sectors, public awareness campaigns, as I mentioned before, informative social media campaigns would definitely be very beneficial. Cross-sector collaboration, which fosters partnerships between law enforcement, NGOs, governments, and businesses. NGOs do have a really integral role in this. Support services for survivors, which means shelters, legal aid, and providing psychological support. And finally, as we know, transparency and accountability are the most important things.
And lastly, we have three recommendations for the technology industries. Following Polaris Project's recommendations, this is specific for social media companies. Prohibiting all forms of human trafficking in the terms of service is one of the Polaris Project recommendations. Furthermore, identifying and investigating high-risk users that are on these platforms would be really beneficial. And implementing safety features for survivors and potential victims on the platforms. For tech companies and social media companies using existing technological advances. TikTok does use AI in their content moderation already, so using AI in identifying traffickers and victims would be really helpful. And then social media algorithms to detect certain trafficking behaviors on the platforms. And finally, as Kavya previously stated, public service announcements are one of the greatest tools we have. They can warn users and potential victims about trafficking risks and signs and what to do. And using social media platforms that have a wide range of audience members can really benefit this. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
This will be questions at the end.
Thank you so very, very much, Celine, Nidhi, and Kavya. Terrific work. And those of you who are joining us, or those of you in the audience, you can tell how much work has gone into these papers. We will turn it over to Jennifer in just a moment. Just one question, and I'm, moderator's privilege here, moderator's prerogative. Some of you were asking in the chat in different formulations, why isn't the private sector doing more? Do we see any best practices? And not to speak for the team, just to kind of to package, if you will, several questions in one short answer. It's really curious how coy many businesses, especially in the hospitality industry, are. This was really kind of one of the things that mainly stood out for us. There could be many reasons. One of them could be that the various hotel chains and airline companies are trying to project their brand. They don't want to be associated, with human trafficking. Oh, look, Delta, is the preferred carrier for human traffickers, which it is not. I'm being slightly facetious here. So that can definitely be one of the reasons, not even trying to be at the forefront of combating human trafficking. There are other reasons, that we can discuss either in the chat or maybe, in another format. But that the coyness and the comparative laid backness and nonchalantness of many businesses in the private sector, the fact that they did not want to engage with us at all in interviews, in conversations, really struck us as rather odd and quite surprising. So yeah, any other ideas, any experiences that anybody who's in the audience wants to share, please pop it in the chat. And again, thank you very much for this terrific research and this terrific presentation. And I would now like to turn it over to Jennifer Park, who will be speaking with us about her work and her research on the relationship between AI, which is artificial intelligence, and human trafficking. Jen, you have the stage. Over to you.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so hi everyone. Before I dive into the applications of artificial intelligence, I also want to briefly define what it is. Sorry, artificial intelligence is a specialized branch of computer science that creates systems capable of learning from vast data sets to solve complex problems. These systems can perform tasks traditionally requiring human intelligence, such as reasoning, decision-making, problem-solving, and understanding language. AI's foundations are built on algorithms, data structures, software engineering, and insights from fields like mathematics, neuroscience, and cognitive science. The backbone of AI functionality lies in three key areas: machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing. Machine learning helps AI identify patterns and making predictions based on data. For instance, this could be applied in monitoring financial institutions and identifying sums of money with unusual spending patterns or going to unusual locations. Deep learning uses multi-layered neural networks to process complex data sets like images or speech. Facial and environmental recognition is a part of this. Natural language processing focuses on understanding and generating human language, which is critical for analyzing written content like social media posts or online ads, especially identifications of solicitous emoticons, keywords, or hashtags. Here you can see that AI is a broad general term, but developing more specialized forms of AI, like generative AI, requires a combination of various computer science fields, such as machine learning, neural networks, and natural language processing. We also need to distinguish between traditional, predictive, and generative AI. In combating human trafficking, AI has evolved from traditional rule-based systems to more sophisticated models. Traditional AI excels in structured scenarios and predefined tasks. For example, facial recognition can identify traffickers in surveillance footage, while fraud detection systems analyze financial transactions to flag suspicious activity. Predictive AI takes us a step further. It uses historical data to forecast future outcomes. It can analyze migration patterns or crime statistics to predict potential trafficking hotspots and help law enforcement agencies target resources more effectively. Generative AI, which is the wave of AI that we have currently been using and the one at the center of most conversations, can create new data based on patterns it's learned. Unlike traditional data, it no longer requires specific programming or data to generate information or to create. For instance, generative AI can produce synthetic data sets to train other AI systems or simulate trafficking scenarios to enhance detection methods. This could involve creating fake text messages, emails, or advertisements that replicate linguistic markers and patterns that are commonly used by traffickers. These synthetic data sets would allow AI to recognize similar patterns in real-world scenarios without exposing sensitive or confidential information. However, this capability also brings ethical challenges like the misuse of AI to create deepfakes or fake job ads designed to lure trafficking victims. Now, I do want to point out that there is a class of AI that is version called agentic AI. And while generative AI responds to human prompts and is reactive, agentic AI is said to be proactive and able to independently perceive, reason, act, and learn without continuous human guidance. My understanding is that it's capable of interacting with other agents, make decisions without defined parameters, and complete complex tasks without the need of human oversight, although I would argue against this latter statement. But given the topic of our conversation, what I found is that predictive and generative AI is most commonly used to combat human trafficking. So we'll focus on those AI types. However, because agentic AI is on the horizon, my later recommendations also keep this in mind. So before we go into the details of risks and challenges, let's also look at the current applications of AI in human trafficking prevention. AI can gather extremely large data sets and distill information and identify patterns quickly. As a result, it can scan for faces of traffickers or of exploited individuals. It can identify environments like an Airbnb or a motel from an image or a video as a few basic examples. Several key AI tools are already being used today to combat human trafficking by developers and organizations who also assist law enforcement. Thorne developed Spotlight, an AI tool that scans online ads, social media, and other digital platforms to identify potential trafficking cases based on linguistic patterns and geographic markers. Spotlight aims to screen 100,000 escort ads a day. According to Thorne's reports, this tool has helped authorities identify thousands of trafficking victims, particularly in child exploitation cases, and has increased case identification speeds by 65%. Veritone offers AI-powered solutions like Track, AI Aware, Redact, and Identify, each of which leverages a different type of AI technology in detecting trafficking-related activities. Track monitors media content in real time. Identify uses facial recognition to identify traffickers and victims across various digital platforms. Redact privatizes identities and textual information, and AI Aware uses machine learning algorithms to analyze audio, video, and other forms of media to help investigators make identifications and accelerate case resolution. The Traffic Analysis Hub, developed by Stop the Traffic in collaboration with IBM, has aggregated data from multiple sources and applies AI analytics to identify trafficking trends, routes, and exploitation types. This tool helps stakeholders, including law enforcement, NGOs, and businesses, analyze and share data to coordinate efforts more effectively. These tools use AI to analyze massive amounts of data quickly, improving the speed and efficiency of trafficking detection and intervention. For example, they can flag suspicious financial transactions, identify trafficking hotspots, and even recognize exploitation patterns in images or videos. I also want to provide some visual context for some of these tools. This interactive map was created by Tech Against Trafficking, a coalition of tech companies and partners to bring together resources, tools, and initiatives aimed at identifying, preventing, and addressing human trafficking. You can mix and match filters to search for specific information, like a region or a tool, and can click on markers for more detailed descriptions. This is Traffic Analysis Hub that I had mentioned earlier. This visualization of data centralizes content from multiple sources, and the information is as broad or as detailed in scope as you want it or need. For example, this is a hotspot map, so you can easily see areas with higher or lower trafficking activity. You also have multiple types of searchable data. For instance, you can adjust filters to specify the type of trafficking. Or you can zoom into a hotspot and select a specific map pin for details on the listed activity. This is a still of Elena. There's a podcast called IGD LCC that had focused on the topic of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. Elena is a name chosen at random, and her face and voice are altered to look and sound like a real person. However, the recount spoken as Elena is from a real person that has been exploited. This is a great example about how AI can be used to protect survivors without diminishing their voice. So while AI holds promise, it also presents significant challenges. One major issue is hallucinations, which is when AI generates or interprets data that is incorrect or misleading. This can cause misidentification of people and dissemination of false information. Another is an inability to distinguish AI from reality. For example, deepfake technology can be and has been used to create fraudulent content such as fake job ads that traffickers use to exploit victims, or in cases of revenge porn. There has been a phenomenon around the world from Australia to Canada to suburban New Jersey, wherein deepfake nude images or deep nudes have been created by school kids of their classmates and teachers, but the trend is always specifically targeting women and young girls. But pushing this thought forward a little more regarding authenticity and the ability to distinguish reality from creation, AI cannot make distinctions based on nuances to apply towards critical thinking. This can cause issues such as misidentifying if a sex worker is actually a victim of trafficking based on ads, or if they're actually working independently or willingly. AI systems also inherit human biases, which can lead to unjust targeting or errors in detection. It can only resource and give outputs based on human input and training. In other words, AI intrinsically has human biases as limited to information that humans have access to and have created. Privacy and human rights concerns are another challenge, as AI tools require access to vast amounts of personal data. Data needs to be stored, and even if there is security to protect data or AI models are trained to spot and censor deviant requests, there is still a chance that technology can be jailbreaked, data storage breached, algorithms miscalculating rewards and punishments, or say governments preventing information, or suddenly deciding that private records should be made public. Less than 1 year ago, it was reported that 2.9 billion personal records were stolen from the National Public Data, one of the country's largest and most secure background check companies, which has now since folded as a result. By the end of 2024, $1.4 billion worth of blockchain cryptocurrency was stolen. $1.5 billion of cryptocurrency was stolen less than 3 weeks ago from the world's second largest crypto trading platform, Bybit. This is all to say that access to data, which is essential to train, improve, and operate AI, is not entirely secure or immune to breaches, even with safeguards in place. And that is just the nature of evolving digital technology. There's also issues related to infrastructure, capital, and power dynamics. Many regions lack the resources to implement AI technologies and solutions effectively, and this can create a disparity in the global fight against trafficking. Costs include infrastructure like data storage and computing hardware, but also global talent. This highlights a fiscal and power disparity, but also an educational one. There is a term called brain drain, which is when skilled and educated people leave their home countries to work in other countries that might have better resources or pay. When considering that human trafficking often stems from poverty, the impact of AI in human trafficking lessens when there aren't AI infrastructures and resources in places that need it the most. Finally, policies and regulatory frameworks. Currently, the EU AI Act is the most comprehensive and enforceable AI regulatory framework in effect. While several countries and entities such as the US, the Council of Europe, and the UN are establishing guiding frameworks or moving towards ratifying their own AI regulations, none are as cohesive or legally binding at this stage. Since this is a horizontal technology, there needs to be an identifiable, agreeable, and enforceable way to ensure that AI development and use is ethical and responsible. This includes privacy and data storage, how AI models are trained, and to ensure deviance is not encoded. This may also include determining how crimes involving jailbreaking this technology or stealing data is handled. Despite the rapid push across nearly every sector globally to incorporate AI, we're trying to do so without first setting a universal normative standard to guide its development and use. This technology also develops faster than policies are able to be created. Just to highlight how advanced AI has become in generating highly realistic but entirely fabricated images. Here's an example of someone that most or all of us may recognize, actor Keanu Reeves. While one or more of these images might depict the real Keanu, I could be making a misleading comment and all these may be AI generated, but I will also let you decide that. So to address these challenges, I recommend the following. First, establish clear and unified global AI regulations. Governments and organizations should work together to create clear universal standards for AI use, ensuring that the technology is used responsibly and transparently. Within the language of policymaking, it should be stressed that humans must be responsible for how AI is utilized. Instead of AI may generate risks and cause harm to public interests and fundamental rights that are protected by union law, which is found in Recital 5 of the EU AI Act. Perhaps we should reconsider that people may use and develop AI to generate risks and cause harm. This puts the onus on the developers and users rather than on the technology. I do want to point out that AI regulations may also create a philosophical question regarding censorship. For instance, while perhaps it's understandable for hate language or homemade bomb-making recipes to be trained out of AI models, Alibaba's QWQ response to Facebook's Llama restricts users for searching for topics like Tiananmen Square, raising questions about how far this control might extend. Second, invest in infrastructure and local capacity building. AI can be costly, both in terms of physical infrastructure and the talent needed to build and maintain it. While investing in these areas is essential, I believe AI also creates a need for greater global cohesion. It's important to remember that in regions most affected by human trafficking, these costs can widen gaps in both wealth and power, the very conditions that fuel trafficking in the first place. We also have to recognize that trafficking doesn't stay confined to one location. It ricochets across borders, impacting communities worldwide. Next, strengthening data sharing and collaboration. Global collaboration is key to tackling trafficking, but by improving data sharing protocols and building trust among stakeholders, we can create a more coordinated response. This may be slightly harder since there may be tensions amongst developers and states due to individual aims, but at the end of the day, at least for the purpose of human trafficking, the goal is to mitigate and stop this global crime from continuing, so perhaps it gives greater reason and purpose for sharing. Finally, promote human oversight. While AI can enhance efficiency, it can never replace human judgment. It's crucial to have human oversight in AI-driven interventions to ensure that ethical considerations are always prioritized. The data sets that AI uses to make its decisions are input by humans. This means that there is an intrinsic bias, which is similar to people. There's also less room for gray areas, which is a very human problem. As was expressed by Ian Caltabiano, Director of Technology at DeliverFund, 90% of the work can be done by AI, but the last 10% of ensuring accuracy and efficacy must be done by human oversight. So human trafficking is a global crime that impacts millions of lives annually. The rise of digital platforms has introduced a new layer of complexity and has amplified the scale of trafficking networks and activities. While traditional investigative methods remain essential, they often fall short when faced with the vast scope and intricacy of trafficking operations. AI offers great potential in identifying disrupting trafficking activities. It can parse through data sets at a global scale, a capacity that is very much needed in our interconnected world. However, it's important to remember that AI, like humans, is capable of errors and is limited by the knowledge it is trained on. AI is a powerful tool, but it's not a standalone solution. It's a horizontal technology that must be guided by human judgment, responsibility, and oversight, approached with both optimism and caution to ensure its application is both effective and ethical. With proper stewardship, AI can be a significant ally in the fight to end human trafficking. And before I close, I want to share a recent reflection from Dr. Rebecca Portnoy, VP of Data Science at Thorn and lead for All Tech is Human. I believe her words capture the careful balance AI developers must strike when using technology to combat human trafficking. She wrote, "The stakes are real and very high with the work that we do. The fact of the matter is that every machine learning AI system, regardless of the use case, will make errors. Understanding concepts like false positives and false negatives is crucial. These aren't just abstract statistical terms, they have real-world implications for the people involved in the system. In Thorn's mission space, false negatives could mean that a child in harm's way remains unidentified and continues to suffer abuse for days, months, or even years. False positives could waste the time of frontline defenders, including trust and safety moderators, hotline analysts, and victim identification specialists, diverting their attention from urgent cases. Navigating false negatives and positives in a privacy preserving way is always front of mind in our work because any use of machine learning AI will result in both. I also want to end with this thought because it highlights a crucial truth that AI is not infallible. It has been made clear to me in every interaction with AI policymakers, developers, and currently available guiding frameworks in AI that no matter how advanced AI becomes, human oversight is not optional, it's essential. And this means from the very beginning of development through its application and as we move forward into the future. Human judgment, responsibility, and the protection of rights must guide AI's path, regardless of the field or location, but especially when addressing critical issues like human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Incredible work. Well done. I know that was a new topic for you as well, and it was an absolutely brilliant deep dive into the use, positive and negative, of AI and the potential, positive as well as negative, for AI in combating as well as in furthering or facilitating human trafficking. And what I think is so important in your work, Jen, is that you highlighted the absolute importance for human oversight of AI, and also what you highlighted is the need or the awareness, let's put it this way, of the potential, the positive potential for AI, that it can be used ethically and it should be used ethically. And at this point, I would like to give a special shout outs to a wonderful colleague of mine here at the Center for Global Affairs, who also works for Microsoft. And I put his name in the chat. He can't be here today. I invited him, but he has work obligations. His name is York Rhodes. He's, as I said, a colleague of mine here at the CGA, who is the founder of the Ethical Tech Collab here at the Center for Global Affairs, works for Microsoft, and works in particular on the use of AI in the widest sense to monitor supply chains for violations of labor rights and human trafficking for the purposes of labor exploitation. And he has been a steadfast supporter of our project, and he is a close friend and collaborator and supporter of Ruchiro's work here at Apne Up. So a big shout out to York Rhodes. Jen, you really brought the work of Apne Up and the challenges and the opportunities that Apne Up, as one of the world's premier and most effective anti-trafficking organizations, is facing into the present. So you talked about the potential for the use of AI and the work that you did for the white paper will really serve as a springboard for future work by Apne Up in terms of advocacy and in terms of prevention projects down the road. So you really started a very important conversation for Apne Up, and many of us, judging from the very active conversations in the chat, for many of us who are working in that space. Now, we are at about 3:47 according to my time. And I would now like to turn it over to our brilliant audience again and invite any final questions. Many of us, Nidhi, Jennifer, Kavya, Maria, Celine, and I, were trying to answer some of the questions. I think we got most of them. Any other questions that emerged? Riley, I believe, Riley, you asked a very important question about early on in the conversation about decriminalizing, kind of the different positions one can take regarding decriminalizing, criminalizing, and legalizing sex work. And you use the case of Nevada, where many sex workers support decriminalization and legalization of sex work. And in Las Vegas, of course. And government officials who are opposed. I think, Riley, Maria tackled that question really, really very solidly. If you have any follow-up questions, please do pop them in the chat. And Catherine and Cassandra, likewise, thank you. And Akiko, and I'm sure I'm forgetting of a few people. Raisa, Sierra, thank you so very much for many interesting questions. Cassandra, thank you so very much for your very, very supportive comments. You definitely added to your knowledge. And really the work that our team of five, well, five and me, really, it was all the work of our students did, adds to all of our knowledge. When we talk about human trafficking, many of us, instinctively think of, how can we support survivors? How can we prevent human trafficking? So and I think it's a very good thing, a very survivor-focused approach. But the surrounding factors, such as money laundering, cutting off money flows, making it more difficult, to move monies around, thinking of border guards. One of you asked the border guards, what can we do to train border guards? What can we do, to train the hospitality industry frontline staff, check-in desks or flight attendants better? This is sometimes, kind of in the background. Likewise, AI didn't really emerge on the scene for us until about a year and a half ago. So this has been really a learning process for all of us. And I think hopefully, hopefully a very valuable one. Let's see, there are 3 more questions. Let's see. Raisa, please do keep in touch. I put my email in the chat 173 several times, so I do apologize for the duplications, but please do reach out. And really, I wanted to highlight again the enormous potential of these kinds of partnerships between NGOs such as UPNE Up and academia. Sometimes people think we are, kind of in the ivory tower. Well, we're not. I think the work that the 5 students were doing really demonstrates the valuable work, very practical work that comes out of graduate programs by really determined and passionate students, with a very, very strong moral compass who want to make a difference in the world. And, the 5 team members that you met today are really the cream of the crop of our program. And can I say, I'm incredibly, incredibly proud of them. And you couldn't have done a better job. And I honestly, sincerely, and passionately want to thank Ruchira Gupta, the wonderful founder and executive director of UPNE Up, again for this opportunity to partner with you on this project. It was an absolute honor and pleasure, and I look forward to many more cooperations and collaborations with you and UPNE Up, Ruchira. Let's see, any other...
We did have one question in the chat.
Yes.
It says, how would you define discrimination in this context?
Interesting. Who would like to tackle that?
Could I add something really quickly?
Absolutely. For it.
So we, Celine Kavya and I, when we were doing this research, we mentioned it a bit in this presentation, but there is a lot of racial discrimination in this subject that we really need to address, of course. I talked a little bit about the hypersexualization of Black and brown women, why they are more likely to be trafficked, but then also within the private sector, there's a lack of proper training, and this when we tell people to be aware of trafficking, we don't really tell them how to be aware. So a lot of frontline workers have kind of they just automatically assume that people of different races, families of different races are involved in trafficking somehow. This actually happened to a friend of mine. She is adopted and she went to an airport security line with her dad, and they were in separate lines. And the worker immediately asked if she was being trafficked, even though the only difference was her race with her father, and there were no clear signs of trafficking. Like the clear signs would be like the victim avoiding eye contact with people, not carrying certain things, like carrying their belongings in a bag and like a plastic bag instead of having a proper suitcase. So things like that. But then also, of course, there's gender discrimination all over the world. And then um, personally, I'm doing a different research project, and in South Asia, the caste discrimination is also really big. If you are of a lower caste in the caste system, then you are more likely to be discriminated against, more likely to be trafficked. So there are things like that all over the world in each country, and it's very specific to each country too, but those are some of the big ones.
If I may add, because we talk about discrimination in specifically for the airline industry, it's really how you assess the behavior of a passenger, for example, based on disability, race, color, national origin, sex, religion, or ancestry. Yeah.
And there is one, thank you so much, Celine and Nidhi, for tackling that question. And then there is one more that Hudson sent me that was farther up in the thread, and I don't want to let that drop through the cracks. How about the role of investors, including the institutional investors who commit ESG? How can we involve investors, the big institutional investors, foundations, and so on in combating human trafficking? Any thoughts from the private sector team in particular?
So one of the things that came up in many interviews with some of the people we talked to was that private sector companies are not are will probably not care about this issue if it's not making them a profit, or if it's not pushing them into a good kind of light or a good view. So this one example of what can one example of a recommendation is what ECPAT is doing. I did put it in the chat too, but ECPAT has a code of what private sector companies should do to follow. And I don't have all the codes off the top of my head, but there are a lot of things that they need to do to follow these recommendations to combat human trafficking. And ECPAT has done a really great job of making them very specific and simple for the companies to follow. And it really shouldn't be too much of an issue for them to follow them. It might take some time for them to get adjusted to these policies that they need to follow. But once they do, ECPAT ranks them and gives them a certain grade and makes that very public. So at the end of the day, the general public can see if they have a good or a bad grade and if they're following anti-trafficking efforts. But at the end of the day, there is this mindset of like, why should we have any corporate responsibility if it's not making us money? So that really needs to be changed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nidhi, for sharing that. Final words before I turn it over to Hudson, who will close us out. No? All right, team, in which case, I would like to thank our fantastic presenters again for three terrific presentations. Please join me in thanking them for sharing their hard work with us. Really, absolutely terrific. Thank you to those of you who joined us for your brilliant questions, for your support, for your kudos. I will share them all with the team. Thank you also for reaching out regarding the PowerPoints. I've seen the messages in my inbox pop in. And as soon as I have the last, all three in my inbox, I will send them to you, within the next hour or so. And you also have my email. Please do keep in touch. You have the emails also of our presenters. If you need more brilliant students to work with you on a project for your NGO or for a business that you may be affiliated with, with, please do reach out. We always look for partnerships here at SPS and here at the Center for Global Affairs. It was a tremendous pleasure again to work with and for Apne Up and Ruchira Gupta. If you have not met her, she is an absolute rock star. So I hope you will get a chance to meet her at the CSW or at another forum. And let's keep up the good work. Onwards together, woman power always. And I would now like to turn it over to Hudson, who is Ruchira's wonderful assistant at Apne Up, to close us out. Hudson, over to you.
Hi all. Real quickly before I leave, I just want to start with a lot of people requested today's presentations and also the recording, and to send it to just all of you at once. I created a Google Drive with all of the presentations and all of the white papers that they were based off of. And if you enjoyed the presentations, I very highly recommend reading the white papers, which go much more into detail and, go are able to go much further in depth. So I'll send that in the chat now. I also just, from AppNyApp wanted to thank the students and Sylvia and say thank you so much for being such amazing partners. And, it is one of the greatest things we can do at AppNap is train a next generation of advocates and get a new generation of people interested in fighting trafficking. We are so thankful that we've been able to train, work with 1,400 students over the years, including here today. And yeah, I also just want to thank the anti-trafficking community and all of you who may or may not be a part of it, just because of our collaborations with all sorts of organizations and individuals and people who care. We have been able to do some amazing work, providing over 600,000 women and families with food, getting 30,000 women into safe spaces, getting 10,000 women government IDs, educating over 4,000 children, and linking 3,000 women to livelihood. And I just wanted to say it wouldn't be possible without all of you. Thank you so much. Also, when I have the recording, I will also put that in the Google Drive. Thank you. And I hope to see many of you tomorrow. We're hosting another event. It's on Huva. Uh, yeah, it's about the connection between migration and trafficking. So I hope to see many of you there. Bye.
Thank you so much, Hudson. Thanks all. Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Onwards and upwards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.